Villain. I'm still a both man. Villain. Man. இன்னும் அது ரிசீவர் ஆன் பண்ணுங்க. ரிசீவர் ஆன் பண்ணவே இல்லை. ஆமா அது இல்லைன்னா இதுல கனெக்ட் ஆயிடும். சார் ரிசீவர் ஆடியோ செக் பண்ணுங்க. இல்லையா மேம் உங்களுக்கு கேக்குதா? ஓடியம்ல சார் கேக்குதா? கேட்கலையா? லைட்டா கூட கேட்கல. கனெக்ட் ஆயிட்டு இருக்கு. சார் கேக்குதா? சுத்தமா கேட்கலையா? கேக்குதா? மூவி பேசாம டேப் போட்டு டேப் போட்டு வச்சிடலாம். போடியம் டேப் போட்டு வச்சிடலாம். சார் கேக்குதா? லைட்டா கேக்குதா? ரொம்ப
குணா குணா
மேம்
பேசுங்க.
கேக்குதா மேம்?
கேக்குது
இப்போ
கேக்குது கேக்குது கேக்குது.
ஓகே மேம்.
குணா இன்னொரு மைக்ல பேசுங்க.
in few minutes, right? Come.
Checking. Hello, hello. Online people, are you able to hear me? Can somebody respond?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So good evening, everybody, both offline and online people. Welcome to this session today. Interesting session. So we will just start with a small invocation. Om. Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sah Veeryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. ஐந்துகரத்தனை யானை முகத்தனை இதனிலந்தனை போர்வைத்தனை நந்தி மகந்தனை ஞான கொழுந்தனை கொன்றையில் வைத்தனை போற்றுகின்றேனே. சமஸ்த ஜன கல்யாணே நிரதம் கருணாமயம் நமாமி சின்மயம் தேவம் சத்குரும் பிரம்ம விபரம். May I request Dr. S. Ramohan to give the welcome address.
Good evening to everybody. This is all the people who are present in the physically here in physical shape, and those who are outside on the online section. Both are welcome, because now this is a subject in which everybody gets involved. This is a decisive moment in the history of the world. The history has seen several wars, several problems. But today is something which is unprecedented. There are two proxy groups fighting with each other. One group headed by Israel, and then supported by its proxies, mainly USA and other countries. And Iran, supported by its proxies, Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Hamas. This is compared to previous years' wars. This is something which is unprecedented, because this can lead to a nuclear war, which will destroy the entire civilization. Somebody asked a scholar, what do you think if next to a current world future war will be? Recently, future war will be fought with. Will it be nuclear bombs? He says, I don't know whether near future war will take part with the nuclear bombs. But I know what is going to happen 100 years later. People will fight with the sticks and arrows, because the entire civilization will be wiped out. We are facing such a situation. So, previously, it is isolated. Even the proxies were isolated. The main fighters were isolated. They are all basically theater wars. Now, from theater war stage, we are going to a bigger area, a larger area where many civilizations will get involved. and many new bombs will be into new technology. This is going to be a test of the technologies in military science also. So we don't know what is going to happen. No, today Israel has launched a war on Iran. They attacked it. So it is likely to become a much larger scale war. In this background, we are assembling today. You are the people who are who will go take part in the near future. You will see the disastrous war, or possibly, if God willing, a very quieter world. So we want to have a involved discussion which is going to be started by an outstanding military expert, Air Marshal Dr. Macheshwaran, who is the former Deputy Chief of Vice Chief of Combined Armed Staff, and then Air Marshal, and then a very highly qualified man. And he is also the president of the only group in South India on warfare and status and strategies. Peninsular Foundation of India. He has contacted so many people, contacted so many conferences, which made people realize about the dangers of war and the technologies of war and survival. So I'm very happy that we are very fortunate here today to have his presence and deliver a talk on the West East conflict and what is the impact it is going to have on India. So the person who is going to deliver is an eminent person. So it should be presided by a more equally eminent person. So we have got our the former Principal Secretary of the Tamil Nadu government. He is there here to preside over the function. He is the 1973 batch IAS, and he is renowned for his an outstanding contribution during the 2004 drought and 2005 tsunami. The entire world stood up to congratulate him. The man who brought the name of Tamil Nadu government into the forefront. So he is there. So both two eminent people are there, Dr. Macheshwaran, and he will give the talk, presided over by our friend, Mr. Santanam IAS, 1973 batch. And he was he held very important post. He was the collector of Ramnad district, and so many valuable positions he held. Then he was the remarkable service, which is unprecedented in the annals of civilization, Tamil Nadu civilization's history, handling the one drought and one tsunami successively. There's something very remarkable. He made a mark for himself, and he is a very great scholar and a very in-depth study. Whatever he takes up, he makes an in-depth study. We have been together in Masuri IAS Academy, so he has been a friend for me for 45 years. I always admire him for his insight and the passions with which he explains. Of course, Dr. Macheshwaran is a very well-trained officer, man with a lot of information about the ecosystems of the entire civilization, political, geopolitical, economic, geostrategic, everything. So two stalwarts are here. So it is up to you to get the best out of them. Like I want it to be an interactive session. All of you should interact with such great scholars and do that. So with that, I welcome Dr. Macheshwaran and Mr. Santanam, and I also welcome all the future builders of modern India who are sitting here, who are all going to be the senior service officers, and prove that you are going to be a competent officer by participating actively in today's session. And we also thank the organization for the academy for making such a perfect arrangement today. Be patient and listen. And I also welcome Subramaniam, one of the advisors of our academy. He is also a very scholarly person, an expert in civilization and Sanskrit. And he has got lots of experience in teaching. He was also a professor in Railway Academy in Baroda, and a man who was trained abroad in France in management. So all of you are very, very glittering audience is here. More glittering speakers are there. I am looking forward myself to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram Mohan ji. Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful welcome address and wonderful introduction of the speakers, esteemed speakers. May I request Santanam sir to give his presidential address.
Respected Air Marshal Dr. Madheswaran, Dr. Ram Mohan, Mr. Subramaniam, civil service aspirants and friends. I was wondering why there should be it's a guest lecture by an eminent person, and there is no need for a president to intervene and then say something. So because guest lecturer is going to cover everything on the subject. So I was wondering where there was a need for this. Anyway, the organizers thought that it's better to have a formal function, with a president and then welcome address and all that. So I said, okay. And I am not an expert on West Asia or any such thing. What I have learned is only through the newspapers and what I have read from elsewhere. So what I am going to present to you also is my perspective of what is happening and what has happened in West Asia and what is happening now, and what is India's role going to be. So it's a privilege. I thank Dr. Ram Mohan for his very kind words of introduction. He has always been very generous, and coming from a scholar like him, it really means a lot. It's a privilege to be associated with this guest lecture by our respected Air Marshal Dr. Madheswaran on a very important subject, which is of relevance to the whole world today. I'll introduce the subject by briefly giving the historical context, the causes of the current conflict, and its impact on India. As you may be aware, this conflict has its origins in the rise of Zionism in Europe in the later half of the 19th century and the arrival of Jewish settlers in Ottoman Palestine. Britain supported the Zionist movement and promised the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Following the British occupation of the former Ottoman region during World War I, mandatory Palestine was established under British control. Continuing tension between the Arabs and the Jews led to the partition of Palestine by the UN in 1947, which triggered a civil war. Israel declared itself independent in 1948. 5 countries, Arab countries, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, attacked Israel. And Israel won notable victories in this war. And the next stage is when Egypt precipitated the Suez crisis by nationalizing the Suez Canal in 1956. Then a coalition of France, Britain, and Israel attacked Egypt and occupied the canal zone. But owing to international pressure, they had to withdraw later. The 6-day War of 1967, many of you would have heard about this 6-day war, saw Israel attacking and destroying Egypt and Syria's air forces. This was in response to the Arab neighbors' mobilization for war. It was an important war for Israel as it took control of the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. In order to retrieve that lost territory, Egypt and Syria attacked Israel in 1973. This is called the Yom Kippur War because it was started on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. It was also called the Ramadan War or the October War. In 1979, Egypt made peace with Israel finally through the Camp David Accord. Egypt was the first Arab country to recognize Israel. Subsequently, some 4 or 5 countries have recognized Israel. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon in order to expel the Palestine Liberation Front, Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, from its bases there. It withdrew from Lebanon only in 1985. After Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon, Hezbollah, a Lebanese militant group, you would have heard about Hezbollah in recent times. It's a Lebanese militant group backed by Iran, continued to press Israel over border disputes and Israel's detention of Lebanese prisoners. In 2006, Hezbollah launched an operation against Israel and brought Israeli forces to a standstill. In October 2023, that is last year, Hamas, a Palestine militant group that controls the Gaza Strip, led an attack against Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking 240 others hostile. Israel, as can be expected, responded strongly, bombarding the Gaza Strip with airstrikes, resulting in heavy casualties and a humanitarian crisis. The war is still continuing and the end is not in sight. The conflicts in West Asia are the result of several factors apart from the animosity between the Jews and the Arabs. One is the sectarian divide between the Shia-dominated Iran and the Sunni majority countries like Saudi Arabia and their struggle for supremacy. Secondly, the rivalry between regional powers as well as the involvement of global powers like the US and Russia have turned local conflicts into broader geopolitical struggles. Thirdly, West Asia is home to the world's largest oil reserves, and the nations that control these reserves have significant economic and political mileage. The rise of terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda has created additional layers of conflict. These groups exploit any instability to expand their influence and recruit fighters. And lastly, ethnic tensions, particularly among Kurds, Arabs, and Turks, have contributed to the conflicts. The Kurdish question has been a source of tension in Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. Coming to India's role, many of you are aware that India's foreign policy in West Asia is driven by pragmatism. It has adopted a delicate balancing act, maintaining strong relations with key countries in the region, avoiding entanglement in local conflicts. Our foreign policy priorities include energy security, trade, remittances from Indian expatriates, and counter-terrorism. 60% of our oil imports come from the Gulf region. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates are some of the major suppliers of oil and gas for India. Any instability in the region not only threatens our energy security and exposes it to fluctuations in oil prices, but also it can lead to mass displacement of millions of Indian workers in the Gulf region, leading to loss of remittances from these countries, impacting our economy. On the diplomatic front, India has maintained very good historical ties with the Arab world, supporting the Palestinian cause And India continues to share strong economic and cultural relations with many Arab countries. In fact, India was the first non-Arab country to recognize the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, as the true representative of the Palestinian people. India is maintaining good relations with Israel also. India is importing military equipment in Israel and has partnered with Israel on counter-terrorism and cyber security. Therefore, India's role is very crucial in this crisis because we cannot afford to take sides. But at the same time, we should use our influence to be a peacemaker. On the trade front, India exports a number of commodities in the areas of agriculture, textiles, and pharmaceuticals. Disruptions caused by the war, such as the blockade on Qatar or the instability in Syria and Iraq, affect India's ability to trade with these countries. Similarly, our imports of dates and dry fruits can be affected by disruption in trade routes and diplomatic relations. The war in West Asia poses several security challenges for India, both internally and externally. The rise of extremist groups such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other jihadist organizations has raised concerns about spread of radical ideologies. There have been disturbing reports of Indian nationals joining ISIS and participating in conflicts in Iraq and Syria. The spread of radical ideologies through social media and online platforms has the potential to influence vulnerable sections of the population. Any instability in the West Asian region can provide safe havens to terrorist organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, which have links to Pakistan-based terror networks. I have given a brief outline and I have just flagged some of the issues and the challenges faced by India while dealing with the West Asian crisis. We can now look forward to a more detailed analysis of the situation by Air Marshal Dr. Matheswaran. I thank you all for the opportunity given, and along with you, I also look forward to listening to Dr. Matheswaran. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this extensive analysis. I may request Air Marshal Dr. Matheswaran to give the keynote of this.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. Mr. Santanam, the chair, and Dr. Rammohan, and Mr. Subramaniam, all the IAS civil service aspirants, and also my colleagues in the Peninsular Foundation, some of them are here. Great pleasure to be here this evening, and always a pleasure to address people of Chinmaya Academy. The topic is extremely important. So, Mr. Santanam has given you a foundation, made my job a little easier. I have chosen to use quite a few maps and some bullet points in the slides so that it becomes easier for you all to understand. And You can stop me anytime in between and ask for clarifications. So then it becomes interactive, right? Okay, so we are in today's world, we are at a critical juncture of world history. And this is all about a world order, an international order in which we have functioned. We came into the international order that's been shaped by the Western powers over 300 years before that. We got our independence in 1947. So much of the world order shaping has taken place through their dominance, their colonial occupation of majority of the world, and imperial, domination. And countries like India and many other countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia became resource providers for their development. So when you now differentiate by saying there is a developed world, there are developing countries, and there are least developing countries or very poor countries. That status has come on account of you being resource providers. Much of your economic development has been hampered by this process. And this is something what a famous economist explains it in his theory called world systems theory, called a person called Immanuel Wallerstein. And he defines the developed countries are the ones who established themselves as the core economies of the world and made sure everybody else got pushed down to the periphery. And then you were exploited, your resources were extracted for their development. So when countries, generally now you would have seen in the discussions in various papers saying India has a problem because it's still developing, it's not as good as the developed world. Not our fault, not that they've done anything great, they've looted you and they've also developed. There are some good things that have been done. But this part of history must be understood very well. And this is also geopolitics. Somebody who's there in the core would not want somebody else to come and share their spoils. That's one. And therefore, you would want to push you at the periphery. Second, colonialism has ended because as a civilizational model, the world has come to now see that as a blasphemy on human dignity, and therefore slavery, colonialism, imperialism, they're all finished with the Second World War, technically. But colonialism exists in a different form. That's what people call it as neo-colonialism or neoliberalism as well. And that's where you bring in various instruments, including the patent regime, technology denial regimes, and trade restrictions, right? When Commodore Perry sailed into Japan in 1853 with his 4 ships and pointed his guns at the Japanese emperor, either you open up for my trade or you're going to face the music. So the Japanese quickly learned their lessons very fast. That's what brought in the Meiji level restoration. And they modernized over the next 40 years to be able to defeat a Western fleet, the Russian fleet, in 1905. But the Chinese didn't do that all that well. So the British went there and said, you have to allow me to export opium into your country, make your people consume the opium. The emperor was crying, my people will be ruined. They were ruined. There were 30 million opium addicts in the 19th century. And opium wars were fought. 3 opium wars were fought by the Europeans against the Japanese, against the Chinese, to be able to make money out of ruining a Chinese civilization, right? This is how the world works. Coming back to, so why am I saying we are at a critical juncture? These 2 wars in Ukraine and in Gaza, and the continued unabashed support of the West and the US in particular to the Israelis' genocide in Gaza, is actually now opened up the world's eyes. There are 2 things that are happening. One, Israel has used the Holocaust victim mentality to milk the world for continued sympathy to get itself, sanctioned or approved for whatever it does. Second, the biggest gain that they've had is what people don't talk about is the massive reparations that every Jew in Israel received from Germany. And Germany was a defeated country, and therefore they continue to even today pay reparations to some of the families whose members were there in the concentration camps. The Holocaust is contested by quite a few revisionist historians. But today, many of the Western world say if you question Holocaust, then you're going to be in jail. And there have been people who've been put in jail. So a lot of things have carried on. A narrative has been built over 7 decades, which is all coming apart now because somebody has crossed the red line beyond any acceptable limits. So you had 43,000 people killed by direct explosions and disaster in Gaza, out of which 17,000 are children, majority are women. And to say that the terrorists are hiding or the Hamas people are hiding behind these people and therefore children are good enough to be killed. And there are doctors who worked in Gaza to say snipers have actually targeted children and killed them. This will reach to the people. And today you live in a world which is extremely well communicated. And therefore it reaches to the people. And that's why you see demonstrations all over. In the US, in European countries, people are demonstrating that this war is unacceptable. Similarly, they're questioning the Ukraine war. They're saying a war that is unacceptable because for your geopolitical corporate interests, you're actually creating and sacrificing people. And this raises the question on the carefully constructed world order of 1945 by the West, which is coming apart. And as we move along, BRICS getting stronger, new economic structures are being created gradually. You will see that over the next 10 to 20 years, the world order would have changed considerably. Two things will happen. Either the West will go to war with everybody else against them, which is suicidal, or they will see sense and then US will turn around and say, okay, drop rest of the West and we will now share power with Russians, Chinese, Indians, and few other great powers. There are more great powers that are arising as well. And this is the transition that is taking place in the world order. So when you now look at a problem, you need to see what ramifications this has on some of these areas that we have. Okay, so to come to this point itself, sometimes I've already given you some background, but I'll explain more on this. You need to look at the genesis of the problem. It goes back a long way. Why are Jews having a problem in the rest of the world? How many of you have read Merchant of Venice? Shylock, did you? Right? So what is the first impression that you make in your mind when you read Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice? There must be a reaction. I had that reaction. Okay, quite naturally. He's painted, Shylock is painted as a ruthless moneylender who would do anything to destroy the other families and take the money. Okay. Now, why did Shakespeare form that opinion to create that kind of a character? And why does he use the word Shylock the Jew? Okay, there's a history behind all this. Okay, so you had Jews spread out all over the world, and they have a strong affinity to maintain their religious practices, one, but they were exceptional businessmen who followed no rules. That's the general reality, right? And that's why that kind of a painting of a character comes there. But that's true. Most of the banking is dominated by the Jews in the world today. Majority of the media in the world, you take from CNN to every damn new media channels in the US and in Europe, dominated by the Jews. And therefore they can put out a narrative that benefits them. Majority of the major Hollywood producers and that movies have an impact on you are Jews. Steven Spielberg, right? A famous movie maker. Okay, so there has been a problem in the past with this, and it starts from the Roman times. But subsequently, there is a religious reason for it. The region is home, the Middle East, or the West Asia as we call it, is home to three fundamental religions of the world, major religions of the world: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Origin of all three is single. That's why they're called Abrahamic religions. All right. While Judaism remains smaller with the Jews because they don't venture out to propagate their religion. They are not a proselytizing religion, as they call it, but they are very fiercely guarded about their religion. On the other hand, Christianity and Islam have been very outgoing to spread their religion, both by force and by the church or by the, the ulama. Okay, so you find the major religions of the world today, maximum followers are in Christianity, Islam, but the Jews are much smaller, but they're equally violent when it comes to protecting their religion and their way of life. Okay, and these are some of these reasons why persecution against them started off all over. I'll come to that point later. But the region that we are talking about in modern times will start off with the Ottoman Empire. Okay, for 400 years, the Ottoman Empire dominated this region: Palestine, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Sinai, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran. These are the countries' names today. They were different at that time. They were all part of the Ottoman Empire. People who populate these regions were Bedouins. There are a lot of tribes. Bedouins is the most prominent of them. And other Arabs. They were indigenous Arab Jews. Okay, they all coexisted. They were scattered from Palestine, from Iraq to Morocco. So the Jews were all over in this region who are different from majority of the Jews who live in Israel today. And that question will come, who are they then? We'll come to that later. The land is not very rich like India is, major rivers flowing down and very fertile lands. It is in pockets, it's fertile, but it's an important trading route, both for the Mediterranean countries and for Asia. And therefore, there's a lot of, importance to that region. Plus, of course, it's a land of olives. Agriculture is now taken a big stage because of modern technology. The genesis of the problem comes with Zionist movement. Because of the persecution in the 19th century, they said Jews need a separate country because we are persecuted all over, and Jews had spread all over. The larger number of Jews lived in Russia, not even in Europe. And the next lot was in Central and Eastern Europe. Then they were scattered in a few other countries. Okay, but everywhere there was some kind of a persecution. Germany did have persecution even in the 19th century because the anti-Semitism comes from a German writer in the 19th century. But his thing is not based on religion. The most important reason for the persecution comes originally from religion, Christianity versus Judaism. Okay, Jesus Christ, is he a Jew? He's the most famous Jew, right? Christianity came off from Judaism. Okay, he is the master who's come, which Christians say he is the messenger of God, whereas Jews say, no, he hasn't come. We are still waiting for him. This guy is an imposter. So that's the breakup. And therefore, Christians, particularly in the Dark Ages, they viewed Jews as killers of Christ. And that's one of the most important reasons for persecution as well at that point of time. But now, enlightenment has come in Western Europe and even amongst the Jews. And therefore, religion is not a major issue currently. But the persecution is more about people being quite intelligent, business savvy, and then becoming dominant, both in holding higher posts as well as dominating the business. You heard of the name Rothschild, banker? Okay. A family that started off in Germany, and the father had 5 sons who sent them off to different countries from Spain to France to UK to start off banking in each of these countries, and then develop the Bank of Rothschilds to be able to dominate the entire banking system to an extent where Lord Rothschild finally says that it doesn't matter who's the king, as long as I lend him money, he's in my control. That's what they did. So when Battle of Waterloo was being fought, in the Battle of Waterloo, he was getting information both from the French side and the British side. And the Rothschild in UK was playing on shares. So the message came that the British initially were likely to lose, and therefore the shares fell down. And then he bought off all those shares, and then the British won, or the Allied forces won. Napoleon was defeated, and then he gained immensely in wealth because of that. Now he is considered, or the Rothschild family today is considered the richest family. They also hold important shares in Federal Reserve, which is like Reserve Bank of India in the US. Is Federal Reserve a central bank like ours, or is it a private bank? Anyone? It's a private bank. Okay, that's one of the accusations that you'll see against them. So they dominate a lot of business, banking systems, and a whole lot of this. Rothschild was an important mover and supporter for the Zionism and towards creation of the Israeli state. So various combinations of anti-Semitism, European Jews issues, and they wanted to move into a separate land, and they identified different lands in the colonial empire, largely driven by British. Here you have two things coming together: Christian evangelism and Zionism. Zionism is fundamentally a political ideology, but they use religion for their benefit. So Christian evangelism, I told you the origin is same for all three religions, correct? And therefore they say, okay, as per the Bible, this is the land of the Bible. It should belong to us. So they're moving the Jews there, taking this opportunity, using the Jews' persecution to be able to create a state. And then they hope that the Christ will come again. It will become a Christian land all over again, or in the future. So this is generally the approach. So Balfour was a very, very strong Christian evangelist. Rothschild writes to him saying, we need to get a land for the Jews, our own land. And Balfour says, here's the biblical Palestine available, and I promise you that I will make that happen. That's a letter he writes in 1917, right? But what is Israel today? One of the accusations against Israel is that it's a settler colony. What is a settler colony? Anyone? We were colonized, but we managed to retain our civilization and our own land and our own people. But what is US? Is it a settler colony? What is Australia? What is Canada? What is New Zealand? What is South Africa? What about many countries in Latin America? Settler colony becomes one when people, for their livelihood, for various reasons of persecution or poverty or making money, they venture out into a different land. You can migrate to work, like a lot of our people work in US now. They are immigrants. But somebody who goes there to take away the land, settle down there and create his own empire there, or create his own, control there, displacing the local original inhabitants, that becomes a settler colony. So the native Indians, as they call in America, were all eliminated through warfare, largely, and disease that they brought from Europe into the Virgin American lands. So the US now establishes a new nation state as they expand at the expense of the original owners of the land. That's a settler colony. Same thing happens in Australia. The Aborigines are removed, killed, thrown out into the sea, And originally the British used Australia as a convict land. People whom they didn't want in England, exiled them to Australia. Later, they expanded that into a colony, and then it became a nation state. So is New Zealand. So is South Africa. Displacing the original inhabitants to take over their land and create your own state is a settler colony. So Israel is again saying the Jews from Europe came to displace the Palestinians from their lands, take over that land and create a state of their own. So it becomes a settler colony, whatever they may want to call it. The linkage of 2000 years old, biblical linkage has no meaning, but that is impractical to link it up that way. So there is a legality and illegality that's involved. And when I show you some more information later, you'll see the way the immigration happened in the late 19th to middle of 20th century to create Israel the way it was created. Okay, so the region here is always been one of great importance. And this is the ancient, populations that lived in some of these areas. Is there a pointer here? Okay, so you have the purple there is all the Greece and the islands around it. You have the Balkan lands in the green part, then Anatolia, which is today modern Turkey, which is the violet. And then you have the Egypt and the Palestine here being shown in brown. You have Asia Minor and extending down to the Persian Gulf. And that region is the land of the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. And wherever rivers are there, that's where civilizations evolved, right? And you have major rivers that are flowing here. One is the River Jordan that flows through Palestine. It comes from the mountains on the borders of Lebanon and Israel, Golan Heights area, and then flows into the Sea of Galilee, which is biblically very famous, and then flows into the Dead Sea, right? So when I first visited Israel, the guy gave me all these stories, and he built up a massive image that I'm going to see a massive river, River Jordan. And then when we saw that, I actually laughed and I said, when we have heavy downpour in monsoons, we have rivers like this in cities. Okay, so, but, I felt bad after saying that. Then we made it up subsequently with the friends. What is more important is when I saw the Sea of Galilee, it is the only river in that region, and Jordan flows into Sea of Galilee. And Sea of Galilee is the only source of drinking water for Israel, Syria, and Jordan. And some of the earlier wars were water wars, primarily water wars. Religion is used as well. But now Galilee is completely in Israel's control. It's a massive lake, and it's very well developed. So the importance of rivers, whether it's big or small, depending on the availability of water, it becomes extremely important. And civilizations tend to develop around that. No wonder you have the three religions from Babylon to Palestine to Egypt. You have three major religions developing in these regions. Okay, so when we come to Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Empire takes off from the Caliphate. Subsequently, you have Suleiman, you have the Turks knocking off the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, 1453, right? And then the Islamic kingdoms develop. At one point in time, they virtually dominate right up to Spain in the European side. And then the Christians push them out, and they move into Morocco, then Algeria, and then they spread out all this that is indicated here. So when the Ottoman Empire lasted for 400 years, there was no problem between Jews and Arabs. There was hardly any problems because the Arab Jews are different from the Ashkenazi Jews, as they're called, who come from Europe. Created this problem here. And when the First World War breaks out, the two world wars actually become graveyards of empires. So in the First World War, three empires die out. One is the Ottoman, the other one is Habsburg, Austrian Habsburg Empire. The third one is Russian Empire, the Tsar. Right? So the work to actually demolish the Ottoman Empire, and it is like when an animal is dying and the the vultures are waiting to actually take it out. Are the two empires, the British and the French, were waiting for the Ottoman Empire to collapse, and they did their work. The British played around with the local chieftains, both in Mecca as well as in what is today Palestine and in Jordan, and promising them their independence once they take over, once the Ottoman Empire collapses. So these are the promises that they made for these people, and when the war ends, the Ottoman Empire is completely dissolved. And you have what is today's Turkey that has been left. Even that would have gone, but for Kemal Atatürk. Kemal Atatürk fought for the Allies against the Ottoman side, and he was a modernizer from the Western, influence. And therefore, Kemal Atatürk was able to save what is today's Turkey. And rest of the Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and right up to Egypt, up to Sinai, falls off into the two empires. So as part of the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations, which was the predecessor to United Nations, they create a mandate. And that mandate is that each of these areas will be given to the two empires. So France takes Lebanon and Syria, and British Empire takes over Palestine, Transjordan, and what is today subsequently becomes Iraq. There are reasons for it. Woodrow Wilson, who brought about the peace deals, he then, because of domestic politics, he walks away. So the Americans had nothing to do. If they were entered the scene, probably they would have taken some control. But they walk away. So the British and French takes complete control of the region. So Palestine comes under the League of Nations mandate for British Empire. And Syria and Lebanon goes under the French. That is why you will find French being taught or spoken in Lebanon and in Syria to some extent even today. And English is the general language of communications in the other regions. Okay. Now, this is as per Article 22 of the League of Nations. There's a covenant that is signed and given. And as per the covenant, it is mandatory to give complete independence to Palestine after they settle down the mandate and peace prevails. That is the covenant. Legal state of the territories is transferred from Ottoman dissolves and goes into the control of British and the French. Okay. Now, when the Zionist movement had started in 1897, first Zionist Congress takes place. Theodor Herzl is the guy who's the brain behind this entire movement. He starts the process, and they convince the British to allow Jews to go and settle down. So even before the First World War, few thousand Jews had moved into Palestine to create agricultural communities. Right? So the process had started. And World War II, World War I leads to Balfour Declaration because of this process. Because of 1897, 1905, the movement starts in a big way in Europe. And in 1917, Rothschild writes to Balfour, Balfour writes back to him, and that is part of the Balfour Declaration, promising that homeland for Jews will be created in the Palestine. This is against the promise given to the Arabs and the Palestinians as part of the League of Nations covenant. It is actually a betrayal, right? So the Jews move in. Once the declaration has been done, then legal and illegal migration increases into Palestine, and the Jews create what is known as Haganah. Haganah was declared as a terrorist organization by the British Empire because that's the methodology they use. And what was the methodology? Is to throw out the Arabs from those villages. They've already sort of promised, earmarked what would be the land of Israel in terms of boundaries, and throw them out by force, terror, and killing. And this is what happens actually, gradually, and take over those lands. Those who are willing to sell, pay them off and then get them off. In the initial stages, that's what they do as well. So the foundation of Israel actually starts with terrorist methods, violence. That is what the world needs to understand. Okay. And all their prime ministers, starting out with David Ben-Gurion and Menachem Begin, all of them, Menachem Begin was the leader of the Haganah, right? So this is the way it was. So when Jerusalem, if you go back and see the Jerusalem, the census records of 1878, you'll see the districts of Akko and Nablus and Jerusalem are the ones that are taken into account. The population is about 500,000, little less than 500,000. And you have, see the composition. The Muslims were 85.5% of the population. You have Christians who were 9%. Arab Jews were 3.2%. By then, these people had started moving in from Europe. There were about 10,000 of them, and they formed about 2.1%. Right? There were quite a few Arabs and Jews who did not sort of give their details in the census. The reason for that is quite clear. One is to avoid taxes. Second, to avoid military conscription in the Ottoman army. And third, particularly to the Jews who were illegal immigrants, they didn't want to get caught and therefore they avoided. So the numbers may be slightly more than that, but it will not be very much different from this. But when you now come down to the 20th century and the census data from 1922 to 1931 to 1944, you can see the transformation of the demographics, right? The Muslims who were 78.3% in 1922 come down to 73.52% in 1931 and come down to 61.01% in 1944. Okay, Christians go down from 9.5 to they go down 7.79%. But the Jews, the migration had started off in a big way now. Okay, so 11.14% in 1922 to 30.39%. The foundational document of Zionist, advice for creation of Israel is that the state of Israel has to be majority Jews, and anyone else who can come in will have to be a very small minority who will conform to the Zionist state philosophy. This is right from the beginning. This is the philosophy that's underwritten in it. Okay, and therefore, at 1944, about 31%, and 1948, the state of Israel comes into being, and they push away 60% of Muslims. They push them away. That is what is called as the Nakba, the catastrophe. And 750,000 Arabs are pushed away from the new state of Israel that's created from Arab villages. 500 villages are evacuated. And that becomes a Jewish majority state from then on, right? By forcibly removing the Arabs. Okay, so the partition plan that the British gave and the UN and the Americans supported and the UN approved finally in 1948 is as indicated here. This is the plan given in 47, approved in 48. They celebrate the Independence Day in 1948, very close to our date as well. And the Arab nations' reactions was one of, complete unacceptance. Egypt, Syria. Syria was created as part of the mandate. Jordan was created. Abdullah of Jordan and his brother became the king of Iraq. Syria and Lebanon were masterminded with the puppets from France. So the whole region is actually being created by these two empires. Okay, so the Arab reaction to this was complete unacceptance, and that starts the conflict process from then on. Now you must remember, the UN in 1948 consisted of just 54 members, right? Majority of the world were still under colonial control. Countries like India had just about become independent, and therefore voices of these countries had little meaning. In fact, they were not even ready to actually take part in the discussions. So much of the discussion that had taken place and this was approved is largely dominated by the Western nations, former colonial powers and the newly independent European states and states in North and South America, right? So this is extremely important to understand. So what happens to now Israel as we move along from then on, right? So gradually, having forced the Arabs out, Israel now consolidates its power over the land. And that consolidation is explained here. So if you look at the people, the total population is something like, 18 to 20 million, out of which 6.6 million are Jewish Israelis who are now there. This has gone up to 7 million plus actually, because what Israel did was, how did they? I mean, their birth rate couldn't have been so high that they became so big. At the time of independence, the population, including Arabs and Israelis mixed, and Israelis were Jews were 31%, was about 1.7 million. Right? They couldn't have become 7 million in a matter of short time period. This is about 2019 figures, right? So what Israel did was it created a policy of inviting all the Jews from across the world to come and live in Israel. So people, Jews who were there for centuries in Cochin, are you all aware? There's a synagogue in Cochin, right? They migrated, and I met one of the Keralite Jews who was born. His parents had migrated. He was born and grown up in Israel and educated. They had migrated in the 60s, if I'm right.
It's also a synagogue. There's also a synagogue in Cochin.
Yeah, that's right. Right. So they got people from all over. So different Jewish communities historically have been existing in Morocco, in parts of Africa, Ethiopia, of course, the larger Ashkenazi Jews, as I call them, as the world calls them, is in Central and Eastern Europe and in Russia, right? But Russians came later. But initially, people from Africa, the North African regions, and Europe migrated. A lot of Americans came. The Europeans and Americans still retain dual citizenship. So when the thing gets a little hot, like the war is happening now, quite a lot of them migrate back to their original homeland. Correct?
Jews in Cochin were prominent. I understand there are Jews in Manipur. One can understand Jews
Yes.
in Cochin.
So that is a research that they do. So they do a various research it's a biblical research. Well, when the Exodus happens as per the Bible, again, there are a lot of questions on that. But when Roman Empire started scattering out the Jews have been thrown out from various places, from Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, and then in Egypt, the Pharaoh, enslaves them and then throws them out. That's when, the famous Moses story comes in. And then again, as per the Old Testament, when the Jews stray from their righteous path, when they become sinners, God ensures that they get scattered away. That is the story that is given to them. Okay, so it is possible that people have traveled all over in terms of trade. They were excellent traders. In business sense, it's phenomenal, right? So it could be possible. It is there's a particular name for these Jews. In Manipur, they had never had any contact with Israel. When the Israelis first went there and they saw them doing the same practices. That is one thing about the Jews, irrespective of where they are, their practices conforms to the religious, rituals that are laid down in the Torah.
Rabbi, also we have the sacred thread, like the Indian Brahmin.
I don't know.
I have met the Rabbi in the international world conference.
The only thing they put is the head cap.
But the rabbis who do the temple worship in the synagogue, they wear a sacred thread.
Okay,
Not on the shoulder, but on their waist.
On the waist, yes, that's true. Okay, so that is how the population increases quite rapidly. Okay, so it's about 7 million Jews right now who are free to live in any part of Israel. And the first time I went in the 90s, you could observe this very clearly. Okay, but the Palestinians were 12 to 13 million. And what happens to them? Okay, 1.6 million Palestinians who live in Israel state as it exists today, because Israel is also this is the thing that came out of colonialism. The colonial empires got used to becoming richer and then using the colonial people to do the menial works that were done by others, by their own people earlier, right? So that is how the earlier migration of a lot of Indian Sikhs, but particularly from Punjab, etc., when they went in 40s, British allowed them because they're wanting these people to take over those kind of jobs, right? This happens everywhere. So majority of the Palestinians are employed by the Israelis. They live there. They're in all kinds of work, but they are ghettoized. Okay, you understand what is ghettoization? That means it's like our some of our areas in certain minorities also tend to get ghettoized. There is, if you look at the Israeli settlement or an Israeli colony in Tel Aviv or near on the outskirts of Tel Aviv, and you see where the Palestinians are staying largely and they come from, there is a world of difference between the quality of services, quality of services, roads, infrastructure, water supply, everything. It's completely different. Right. So that is ghettoization. So they are ghettoized. They're not allowed to travel freely within Israel, although they are Israeli citizens. Okay. And they are allowed to fight. Some of them also joined the Israeli military, IDF, and they fight as well. 300,000 East Jerusalem, which has also been taken over by Israel after the 67 war, they are ghettoized as well. They are not allowed to move out of Jerusalem to rest of Israel even. That is the kind of draconian, control they exercise. And what happens to the territory? So they have, is there a pointer in this? How do I use that? No. Okay. So this is the original plan given by the UN. On the left, the first map, all the blue shaded one is the Israel land. What it consists of is 78% of historic Palestinian land, particularly 500 plus depopulated Palestinian villages form this particular state. Now, when you move on to the West Bank, which is the West Bank, which is taken over by Israel in the 67 war, that's now broken up into 166 separate enclaves. They put checkpoints between various enclaves. So the Palestinians, it is not a contiguous territory, even though on map it looks contiguous. They're broken up that way.
But all of them are owned by. All of them are held under the sovereignty of.
Yeah. Israel has complete control. I'll come to that later. Okay. The annexed from rest of West Bank and divided by Israel separation wall is the East Jerusalem. It's totally taken over. The small box of green that you see here in the last map is Gaza. It is separated from the West Bank and therefore exercising control. It's like East and West Pakistan that Pakistan had some time back. So that is why Hamas came up there and the Palestinian Authority and Fatah continues to rule in the West Bank. They are under the control of the Israelis virtually. Now, when you look at the overall control, the accord or the peace, what was called as a successful peace talks in Oslo, was meant to actually create two sovereign states. Or rather, Israel was already a sovereign state by the 1948 UN declaration. The 1993 Oslo Accord was to create a Palestinian sovereign state, but that didn't become that way. So Israel has complete control over its security, over its civics, over its natural resources, and only a certain amount of administrative functions is the Palestinian Authority allowed to hold. That's why the problem, that is the fundamental problem with average Palestinians, and particularly in Gaza. Gaza is called as a concentration camp virtually. Israel had its control till 2006. Then by that agreement, they moved back, and now they exercise complete control. If you go into these regions, in the 1990s, there were no walls around these regions. But when I went in 2009, all these areas have been walled off. It's like boundary wall, very high. They're about 25 feet high. And they're all completely, electronic, surveillance, complete surveillance is there. So this is how they've been barricaded. So when you get barricaded, 1.9 to 2.4 million people in Gaza, and another few million people in West Bank, then people will tend to be, will want to break out Correct? There's a rebellious streak that will come in. And that is the problem. What does Israel control here? It controls the land, air, and sea completely. Right? 90% of historic Palestine is under exclusive Israeli control. Only 10% is under limited Palestinian control. And Israel controls all Palestinian natural resources. And it controls all Palestinian airspace and telecommunications. And it controls all Palestinian border crossings. Okay, so you can imagine the life that would be there for these guys. Second is the cartographic aggression that generally the experts talk about both in UN and in all other regions. These maps indicate practically what has happened. What was Palestine on the left gradually gets eaten up. That is 1947 with the new state coming into existence by the UN announcement. And then it reduces further. You see, if you see the original UN plan is the Gaza region. The Gaza region extends here, correct? There's a continuity here. You can see that? And this part is where the Golan Heights and those regions come. So you have a continuous land process as per the original plan. That gets broken off in the 67 war, or even in 48 itself, they fight a war between the Arab countries and Israel in 48-49. They break off part of that. And then 67, they seal everything. They capture the Golan Heights, they seal off Gaza separately, they seal off West Bank separately. They occupy West Bank was originally under Jordanian control. And the last map is what you're seeing. All the Palestinian independent control for the Palestinian Authority becomes small pockets in the West Bank. The settlers who have gone, the Israeli state has enabled the settlers to go and occupy land and settle down there and create communities there. The numbers, which was in the 90s around less than 100,000, today is about 750,000. It's about 900,000. They're nearing 1 million very soon. So they've virtually taken over that complete land. And this is what Netanyahu showed in a map, 2 years back in the UN, where he indicates his entire intention is to create a continuous, eliminate complete Palestinian land, control anywhere or Palestinian territory anywhere, and have a continuous one right up to Jordan. And that's what they call as from the river to the sea. Okay, now these are the developments that have taken place as part of the conflict, and you must understand these parts. Balfour Declaration 17, 47 UN Partition Plan, 48-49 is the Arab-Israeli War, and right up to 73, the Palestinians, along with their rebellion, they were supported by physical support by the Arab countries, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq, and Iran from, of course, foreign, right? So in 49, they go to an armistice. In 56, when Nasser, Abdul Ghama Nasser, the Egyptian president, nationalizes the Suez Canal, now these two colonial powers, the French and the British, now instigate Israel, and all three now launch an attack on Egypt. All three launch an attack on Egypt. It's only Eisenhower, who's the president of the US, who now turns around and says, you better back off. It is the nation's, a right to nationalize, they want to nationalize, and let them do that. Right? And that's how the 1956 war, they come into the Suez Canal, they occupy Sinai, and then they withdraw. So this is the war that happens in 1956. Moshe Dayan gains fame in this one. Right? 1967 was a 6-day war, once again mobilized by Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. And this was a complete overall of the Arab armies. They all completely get vanquished on a preemptive strike by the Israeli Air Force. Now, Israeli military main strong point is the Air Force. Ruthless, ability to exercise the air power, one. And second is, they get massive support from the US. Without the US support, both in materials and military equipment and intelligence support, it is not possible for the Israeli military. You see on the ground operations, they're having serious problems with the Hezbollah in Lebanon, southern Lebanon. Okay. So in 67, they win comprehensively, and that is where they capture all the areas they wanted to capture. Now, what's happening, the war now is to complete. That means there will be no West Bank, there will be no Gaza, it will be one integrated Israel. and they'll wait for the next one. If they succeed this time and the world turns a blind eye, this is what will happen. And this is the genocide that's going on because they want to. The Israelis follow the normal Western way of fighting a war. What is the Western way of fighting a war? Well, they have all the weapons and everything. That is one issue. The Western way of fighting a war, contrary to what they propound in terms of human rights and Geneva Conventions, etc., the US or any of these nations do not respect any of that. So you find in the Vietnam War, the US kills nearly 3 million Vietnamese civilians, about 2 million Laos and Cambodians in the entire Vietnam War. They don't bat an eyelid. Okay. Similarly, in the Second World War, it is a deliberate policy to kill maximum civilians to be able to bring in hardship on the population so that they can force the leadership to withdraw from the war. This is the fundamental issue. So they use excessive air power and excessive weapons. So Dresden was completely demolished in the Second World War. Over 100,000 German civilians get killed. And similarly, when the Second World War it was over actually, Japan was already a defeated country, but US exercises for geopolitical reasons to drop the 2 atom bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, killing 200,000 people. So when it comes to achieving their geopolitical objectives, they do not worry about killing civilian lives. And Israel follows the same methodology. So they want to exercise maximum destruction, create inconvenience to the civilian populations, assuming that they will back off, they will vacate the lands, and they will go into Egypt or Jordan or elsewhere, and Israel will have complete control. They may still have control because that's what they've done. But resistance doesn't die. When more and more people get killed, that's what you learn from Vietnam War, from the Vietnamese particularly. Finally, who withdraws? In Afghanistan, from Taliban, who wins? Who's withdrawing? Correct? The superpowers withdrawn, right? So there is a lot of lessons to learn, but some of that doesn't seem to go in. 1973 Yom Kippur War was an avenging war by the Egyptians for the humiliation they suffered in 67. When you visit Cairo and see the War Museum in Cairo, which I saw 2 years back, or last year actually, and that comes out beautifully there. Because much of the time, we get the Western narrative. And being from the Air Force, we were very fond of Israeli Air Force for the professionalism that they've exhibited. And I met a lot of them. Right up to 73 war, the military professionalism I consider was exceptional, even in 82, of the Israeli Air Force particularly. And therefore, we have a lot of affinity on that score. But now seeing what has happened post 1987 onwards, I think that respect will start dwindling very fast, particularly in what's happening in Gaza now. Okay, so 1973 war was where Egyptians sorted out the Israelis. The acceptable attrition rate in the starting phases of a war should not be more than 2%. The Israelis lost 100 aircraft within the first 4 days. And that was an attrition rate of more than 5%, right? And they lost a lot of people. And very innovative methodologies and very good strategic geopolitical maneuvering by Anwar Sadat was evident. So the Egyptians were shown that they could handle the Israelis extremely well. So only when the Americans stepped in and then gave crucial intelligence inputs and allowed the Israelis to push in forces across the Suez Canal to be able to envelop and encircle Cairo is when the ceasefire was announced, right? But post 1973, having achieved the Americans, Carter was the president. He convinced Anwar Sadat, and they signed the Camp David Accord. And now Israel and Egypt are at peace. A similar thing happened with Jordan. So that's the reason you find these two are not entering in any kind of support other than making political noises for the existing crisis in Gaza. That gives a lot of strength for Israel as well. 1993 Oslo Peace Accords, when Yitzhak Rabin was the prime minister, was the last final attempt, which was ruined by the right-wing politicians in Israel, because they signed the accord. they were supposed to create a Palestinian sovereign state, and now they've actually taken them for a right completely, and that's the reason for it. So Nakba, the struggle goes on from 1948. Where I mentioned about 750,000 people driven out of 500 villages, and this leads to the major problems. UN, despite pointing out the evils of that forced evacuation of Palestinian civilians, has not been able to bring in any kind of an influence on Israel simply because of the American support. Now, on the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority has been sort of, post the Oslo Accord, there was a sort of a trick played on the Palestinian Authority. So the Israelis now said, because of their security considerations, the area will be divided into A, B, C. Area A is 18%, which will be under Palestinian Authority control, both civil and security. And area B is only civil control, which is 22%. So 18 plus 22, 40%. And area C is 60%. The major portion of West Bank will be completely under Israeli civilian and security control. Right? But what is more interesting is the area C is continuous. And so it enables Israel to move in their settlers to go and occupy the land and anywhere and develop their settlements, whereas A and B are fragmented. So you create various checkposts, we create various controls, and you break up the region, and that becomes a problem for Palestinian Authority. It's fragmented into 166 separate enclaves. So this is something you need to actually understand. So all this leads to what's known as the resistance forces, and we need to define terrorism. How would you define terrorism? When any entity kills civilians and children and creates disturbances for normal course of life for civilians, women and children, that act would be a terrorist act, right? So in that score, then Israel's birth is right through, has been through terrorism. And when somebody else now does, you cannot have the same logic not being followed. So Hamas and Hezbollah are resistance fighters because of the situation that I've explained now. But because US is dominating the world order, and when US designates somebody as a terrorist entity, the advantage comes to the other side. It happened with LTT as well. And therefore, you're able to actually ruin and kill completely because every other entity who's seeing the right cause and willing to support, they withdraw. So the only entity that supports Hamas and Hezbollah are few select Arab nations, very few, and Iran being the most important one of them, right? So for them to survive becomes very difficult. And therefore, they will have to do a lot more other activities. Second, here's a military that's fighting against underground resistance forces. There is no air force with them. They have only rockets. And to be able to actually survive and fight indicates they are quite, capable of handling, but for the damage that the air power does from the Israeli side. So the number of deaths of civilians is mainly because of complete dominating control by the Israeli Air Force on the scene. And second is the support from Western nations as well. Intelligence support is extremely important. But the two wars, as I've said, Ukraine as well as Gaza particularly, has revived the understanding or brought in better understanding for the larger segment of populations across the world. And therefore, the support for the Palestinian cause has grown enormously. And this is something very important to understand as well. Okay, now, current situation, the general tendency is to say October 7th happened, and that's why Israel had to now defend itself by exercising overwhelming force. But logic now doesn't sell anyway. Much of the October 7th, yes, 1,200 people were killed, but further investigations later, the Israeli military follows something called the Hannibal Doctrine. And the Hannibal Doctrine is to ensure that no Israeli falls as a prisoner to the Hamas or Hezbollah. And therefore, if they can't sort of rescue them, kill them, so that there is no live guy who gets taken as prisoner. So in that context, the Israeli Air Force, the helicopters went berserk. And by the latest studies by Israelis themselves, now they accept that half the guys were killed by the Israeli Air Force itself. So it's about 600, 700 who were killed by the Hamas, and another 600 odd people were killed by the Israelis. That's one narrative. But most important, and that is what Yahya Sinwar actually gives out in an interview. The world had started forgetting the Palestinian struggle. And he said we had to do the October 7th to get world's attention back again on our cause. Otherwise, we would have been completely gone. Maybe, in that context, the world is riveted on the Palestinian cause right now. Okay, but the cost that they paid is enormous. Was that worth it? Is a big question. They will have to look at. But you don't see any Palestinian complaining very much. They are withstanding the killing and they're getting along. So that shows a different mindset completely, right? So, but what is important is for Israeli response is going to backfire on the Israeli state. It is now including a lot of Israeli scholars from Israel and people who moved out of Israel and right from US and UK say there is no doubt that this is a genocide, right? And this is what the US will not be able to defend Israel anymore because majority of the world clearly says this is a genocide. 43,000 dead. By another analysis by Nature magazine in UK, it says 43,000 are the people who have been, you can count, who died in front of you with the bombing. There are many more probably who died buried by the rubble. You don't know the numbers. Plus the after effects in terms of your maiming, losing limbs and disease. Now there is starvation in a big way and epidemics that are likely to break out. The number of people who already are on the verge of death has crossed the figure of 200,000. In a population of 2.4 million, 200,000 deaths is what the UK-based Nature magazine calculates as the cost of this war. Right, so Israel's open defiance to international norms, Israel open defiance to humanitarian issues will backfire on this. And that problem is because the current control is completely with the Zionist right wing, who, like I said, the original Zionism is essentially a political ideology, but that's now got merged into a very hardcore right-wing Jewish, believers. In the Jewish system, there are two kinds of people who follow these scriptures. One is called Torah scriptures, which lays down the general, laws of life. The more aggressive one is called the Talmud one. Talmud is xenophobic. It is supremacist in its assumption of the Jews and says anyone for your objectives you can kill. It doesn't matter whether children, women, or any civilian. You can kill anybody to achieve your objective. So they use the Talmud to sanctify or to justify the killings that they do. These are all Talmud believers. And these guys have started coming into the scene from 1970s, starting up with their American originator for this entire philosophy. But now Netanyahu is a strong believer of this. And Netanyahu's defense minister is another guy from this entire philosophy. So the centrist believers of Zionist political ideology have all been overtaken by a hardcore right-wing ideology. When I first visited in the 90s, and I spoke to the Israelis, they were good friends. They were very clear, we are not wanting conflict anymore. I don't want my children to fight the war. We want to live in peace with the Palestinians. This is the general belief. And they very clearly said 80% of us are secularists. We are not hardcore. There are 20% hardcore right-wing Jewish ideology priests who control the overall system. So on the Sabbath, the people who are hardcore believers, they will say you can't move anything, nothing, no electricity, no vehicles, nothing will move. Okay, but majority of the people, they say, into hell, we can't live like this. Correct? So those who are away from the 20%, they continue with their normal life. But Saturday is a Sabbath day, so it's a holiday. So they will have to do whatever they pray at home or whatever they have to do. But you go to Jerusalem, you'll see these guys in the black robes and the black hats who will start pulling up people if they don't follow as per the scriptures. And that lot has come to the fore. And Netanyahu uses that. He may be a smart politician using that to actually keep himself in power, but the corruption cases and other criminal cases against him probably makes him continue with this as well. So the core issues are Israel has already been designated with respect to guilty of being war crimes by the International Criminal Court. And that needs to, a thought needs to be given to that. Its object is very clear, ethnic cleansing. Lots of Ilan Pape is a Israeli historian who's fought in the 1973 war, and I've interacted with him. He very clearly says his first book that he wrote is The Palestinian Ethnic Cleansing by Israel. Please read that book. And that is the clear object. The Zionists versus Torah Jews. Torah Jews, as per the scriptures, they say the concept of Israel as a nation state is conflicting with the Torah scriptures. You think there cannot be an Israeli state. In fact, they say, the Torah Jews say, it has to be a Palestinian state where Arabs and Jews live together. The Torah gives you the norms to live by and not go about Israel. The Jews are not a nationality. They are from all over. So that is the, so this conflict is emerging now in the context of this problem that's going on in Gaza. Support of the US and West, like I said, continued support actually brings problems. So within the narratives in the US public sphere, and when I went in May, the universities, all the students are protesting. The Columbia University protests were very violently, knocked off by the state. And therefore, there is a problem. The state, when you call yourself as a democracy, if majority of the people are raising questions about a particular issue, the state must, the elected representatives must listen to that. But that's not happening. And therefore, democracy itself is in question as far as the West is concerned. The Arab nations, why aren't the Arab nations supporting the Palestinians when so much of killing is taking place? Anyone? Can you answer? Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan sits in the center there, and Jordan is not making a noise, not taking a step forward to support the Palestinians. So is the Gulf countries. Why? They all?
It is because of the separation.
Not separation. So majority of these countries are monarchies. They are virtually authoritarian regimes, right? And they are mortally scared of an Arab Spring coming back again. So they don't allow the protest in support of Palestinians. Initially, there were some protests in Jordan. Now there are draconian controls. No protests are being allowed. Still protests are happening in Jordan. From Amman, I get, my daughter visited there. I get a feedback. Egypt is under military control. Sisi was been re-elected. When I went last year in Cairo, a professor was my guide. He says Sisi will for sure come back. He's an excellent guy. When I moved further south, halfway down of Egypt to Luxor, he was another excellent guy. He says Sisi is a useless guy. He needs to be removed if at all he should be killed. This is the statement he used. Okay, because that's a rural region largely of poorer people. And so there is a big division. But then how is he succeeding? He will win. He said he will win because he's corrupt. But he will control with the military rest of the country. So that control, and plus after the Camp David, they're virtually in control under the thumb of the Americans. He will not move an inch. Jordan, his survival, they're all mortally scared of any protest, moving into people's movement and bringing in socialism and democracy and throwing off the, monarchy. So Abdullah is extremely scared. So he will not move an inch. So is the case of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a classic case of one of the most useless, controls. It's not a democracy by any stretch of imagination. But how do they keep the people under control? So you will find that thanks to the oil wealth, there is enormous amount of rich wealth that flows into these countries. And they make sure that the average population are seduced into consumer culture. So you go into Abu Dhabi, you go into Dubai, you see everything under the world out there in plenty. And if you're a citizen there, everything is available to you. And when an average citizen is extremely, satisfied with respect to consumerism, then he says, okay, somebody else is getting killed somewhere else, so why should I worry? My country is okay, my quality of life is better. Well, so they are ensuring that that is the process that will be controlled. This they've learned after the Arab Spring lessons. Particularly, there were some protests in Bahrain which almost shook the Bahrain ruler. Now you go and see the Bahrain airport; it's a fabulous classic airport, and everything in the city is, I believe, it's a world class. So this is something that probably is the reason why they're not making too much of noise. But at the same time, there is a limit to everything. So Saudi Arabia said, unless the Palestinian issue is sorted out, we will not move ahead on the normalization talks with Israel. They sent that message to US. The UAE, who signed the Abrahamic Accords, who is also now a member of the BRICS, will think twice, because they'll all, some of these, although they are monarchies and they are authoritarian regimes, some of the rulers are well educated, and they probably will go by a reasonable good advice. UAE is one of them in that context. Okay, so what is the impact on India? So if you go through our history, traditionally we've been supporters, having come through a colonialism, we support the underdogs. And then our leaders have understood very clearly that the Palestinians have been, unjustly treated by the rest of the world. And therefore, they were not, India in the 50s and 60s were not against Israel, but they said Palestinian sovereignty must be respected. So we've always been for a two-state solution. So we've supported the Palestinian cause. We did not recognize Israel for this very same reason for a long time. Right? In 91, we recognized Israel. Narasimha Rao became the prime minister, and the defense attaché is an Air Force person. And that is how we started off in the 91. Why did we recognize Israel? We never had any relations with Israel before that. We've done dealings with Israel, right? Countries do that in national interest, and unofficially we've had various kinds of connections. But in 91, it became official. We recognized Israel, and from then on, it's been a very strong upward curve in our relations with Israel. We've gained, both countries. Israel has gained immensely because a huge country, a democracy, supports Israel. And that's a very big plus point for them. They wouldn't want to lose that. But now, there will be big questions on this for India. So if you look at the reasons for recognizing Israel in 1991, that despite, and Palestinians were different from other Arab Muslim countries. So Organization of Islamic Countries, you look at the statements that came out for nearly 30 years during that period, majority of the time there would be some criticism on Kashmir, or something would be in support of Pakistan or Bangladesh, which I think probably crossed the limits of endurance for India at that point of time. That's one of the reasons which pushed India to say enough is enough. If you're not willing to see the right things, then we would recognize Israel. We will build our relationship quite openly. Correct? So while we recognize Palestinian cause, we recognize Israel as a nation state as well. Because there are 700,000 Jews who now moved in there. You can't throw them back again. So the best is to find a solution. With respect to our relations, there is enormous business that goes on in the defense particularly. I've personally been involved. But in agriculture, there's enormous gains that we made using Israeli technologies. For efficient agriculture technology, Israelis are the masters in it. So whether it's Jain irrigation system or any other, they've all gained from Israeli technology exposure and technology inputs here. And nothing comes free. Israelis, I told you, they are very sharp and excellent businessmen. So they're making enormous profit. Don't be under the mistake that they're doing any favors to us. It's a very ruthless way of connectivity. So there is a strategic partnership that plays in a big way. Given the problems that we have with Pakistan, even in Bangladesh to some extent, and the Islamic fundamentalists, it is extremely important to share intelligence on various issues, since they also face similar issues there. And therefore, the intelligence coordination between the two countries is an extremely important aspect. Plus, weapons. We buy a lot of weapons. We are the largest, I think, weapon importing country from them. And we do a lot of joint research and development projects. The MR-SAM is one of them. And there is, a give and take on both sides here. Industry, there's a lot to gain from the kind of the culture that they have and approach, particularly with the startup system that they have, and the technical education. That I think we've not captured. We are now just about learning and we are starting off on our own. But I think we could have done that much better earlier. War against terrorism, we are together. 2008 Mumbai attack, the Israeli Shabbat house was, it was a very, it was a huge tragedy where everybody was killed. The child was recovered. I was in Bombay and I was actually coordinating the air operations at that time. So I personally, aware of, what happened there. So if you go through Jewish history, they have been persecuted pretty much in every part of the world at some point of time or other. India is the only country that's never persecuted any religion minorities, right? Zoroastrians came running from Iran. The Jews came running at some point of time, and they've all lived quite comfortably here. Big commanders have been there from the Jewish, families. Your number 2 to Manekshaw in the Eastern Command, I forget his name, Lieutenant General Abraham, Okay, so very, very good personalities have come from the Jewish side as well in our this thing. Jacob, okay. Jacob, that's right. So what should India do now? We are at a tricky situation because certain red lines have been crossed by Israel, and US is, I would say, as a hegemon, as a great power, all of them come through the curve down at some point of time. You never remain at the peak. So it's Paul Kennedy in his fabulous book, The Rise and Fall of Great Powers, says every great power finally ends up what's known as the strategic overextension. Because a great powers provide public goods on their terms, which are accepted by others, that public goods becomes a cost. How does it pay for the cost? That's why it creates a reserve currency. So you can keep printing and pay for the cost, everybody else will accept. That's one of the reasons. But beyond a certain overextension, it is not able to sustain that process. And that is why it goes to war or creates wars in various areas. So for 20 years, the overextension happened under the impression that this is now a unipolar world, we can do what we want. And they started the Gulf War in 91. Since then, there's no looking back, right? So there's been continuous series of wars. They've gone and ruined Libya, they've ruined Syria, they ruined Afghanistan, right? And everywhere, I think it's been an instability that's been created. But it's now going to get the rest of the world against them. It's already happening. So if the financial pillar of the global governance gets taken control of by the BRICS or the Russians and Chinese, the dollar will start losing its control. When that happens, it's a serious trouble for the US. Although it's going to take some time, another 20 years probably. But that downward slide is happening now, right? Israel will have to now wake up because much of Israel's military is a free grant from the US. All right, while they develop a lot of weapons and they develop a lot of technology, much of their military is virtually free for Israel from the US. And that kind of an ability to pay probably will start coming into question very soon because US is now under $35 trillion of debt, national debt, right? This is what you need to look at. So the humanitarian considerations, India must prioritize. India must look at what happens to the world order. India is a rising power. And we need to actually look at our ability to influence things. That should not get compromised by a blind support to somebody else as well, right? So I think our two-state solution is a good stand that we've taken. Our immediate reaction after October 7th from the PMO was India supports Israel to take whatever action it wants in self-defense. Very soon they realized that's probably a huge mistake. So immediately the MEA came out and said, hold back, India supports a two-state solution. India looks at the justifications of both sides, right? That is, you must look at that statement again. So as a rising power, we have a lot of responsibilities. And remember, you can't be a great power without being ready to do or bear the cost of giving public goods to the rest of the world. We must understand that impact. All right, so the imperial, USA is an imperial outpost that is under decline. BRICS role is increasing, as you've seen what's happened in the last 2 days. and then UN will get under pressure to reform very soon. Probably countries will say, let's wind up the Security Council and go through a major reformation, like we created the UN after League of Nations, right? That's probably likely to happen. And more importantly, you always have to keep China in your radar. China is gaining immensely in this process. They have not made too many statements against Israel, but they've called all 14 different factions of the Palestinians and advised them, get together. You guys are fighting amongst yourselves, and that's not doing any good to your cause. So they got them together, and they've intervened between Saudi Arabia and Iran and said, you get your act together. And they've made up, right? So China's stature, and that's the hallmark of a great power. It's rising quite fast and quite well. We need to keep that in our horizon. And our actions will have to be based on that, right? Thank you very much. Let's stop here. Yeah, any questions? Anything?
Anybody has got any important question to ask?
It's been one way talk. Always. No questions, too long.
Wait.
Yeah.
So you've been saying that China has been in consideration when it comes to the play, especially when the Chinese movement has been diplomatically active in bringing the countries together. So do you see this as a sort of threat, particularly to India with its West Asian partners?
It's no, there is no threat to our profile. You know, it's about influence. What is the great power wanting to do? That other countries should be able to listen to something it says, correct? The US has gone beyond a point of no return where it says, this is my command, you better listen, right? The correct way is, in the initial stages of a great power's rise, the great powers will try and be as appealing and attractive as possible and give their ideas in that. That China is succeeding in that score is evident. That's why I gave you these examples. India has always kept itself, we are trying to do something in the Ukraine war, but I don't think it's effective enough. There are many other things that will go behind the scenes to do that. Why would a country listen to you if that country doesn't see enough value in what you're saying and benefits in what you're saying, right? So the stature, the economic power, technological power, all these comes into play. And this is something we need to keep in mind. So it is not just, one day you wake up and say, okay, I'll advise you to listen. No, it's not going to happen. They'll only listen when they say all the other elements of great power are there with you. And you're going to be a major power who's going to rewrite the rules and regulations of the world order at some point of time. That's the way.
What is Russia's game in this conflict?
Well, I told you the large number of Jews were in Russia as well. So if you noticed early this month, the Russian president or the Russian government sent out a message asking all Russian citizens to get back from Israel. They are Jews, largely, well-known Jews, 1.5 million of them. That is the latest lot who've gone in. Majority of the people I've met, about 60% of the people in Israel, the Ashkenazi who are in control, they are the European origin Jews, are all from Eastern Europe, Central Europe, that is Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and then Russia. And those of you who haven't seen a very old movie called Fiddler on the Roof, have you heard of the name? Please see it. Okay, the director was Topol, and I met him a few years ago. He's a 6.5 feet guy in Jerusalem. That movie is beautiful. That movie is located, situated in the Eastern Europe. That actually is quite true to what was actually happening. Yeah.
Anybody? Alia, you want anything? No.
Okay. Online people, do you have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask. Those who are online.
Sir, I have one question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can India not take a complete neutral stand? And if it takes a neutral stance, what will be the consequences?
I think we are right now virtually holding a neutral position. We are not making any statement against Israel, nor are we overtly supporting giving statements. We are only giving out humanitarian statements. Correct? The loss of lives is not acceptable, and the conflict should come to an end. So I would say it's not even neutral. Yeah, in that context, I think we are giving a very very safe and not taking responsibility. Let me put it that way. As a great power, you must also take your responsibility to say that this is not done and this cannot be done, and therefore you better stop this. But sometime we need to do that.
Anybody else?
Any other?
Anybody else? Here, offline and online.
Okay. We have listened to a very interesting and enlightening lecture. Lot of points which you are not even aware of became like a flood. I am very, very grateful to Dr. Matheshwaran. He is a very busy person, international level, but has come all the way to enlighten us. David Ben-Gurion, first Prime Minister of Israel, once somebody in a press interview asked him, whom do you consider as the worst enemy of Jews? Is it the Russians, or the Germans, or the bigots, Islamic bigots? Whom do you consider as the worst enemy among all of them? Ben-Gurion said the worst enemy for Jews is neither of them. It is Moses. Then they were all surprised. How Moses can be the enemy of the Jews? Then Ben-Gurion said, see, he made the Jews walk several kilometers, miles across the Negev desert in search of a promised land. Finally, he settled us in the only country in Israel, in West Asia, where there is no petrol. So he is the real enemy. He could have taken us to some other country. So Israel has always got the problem. There have been great scholars among the Jews, many scientists, right from Einstein, Marie Curie, then philosophers like Spinoza, but yet there's an undercurrent of cruelty in them. That's the problem. And it requires a great civilizational, cultural metamorphosis to sort out all these problems. It will take some time. Anyway, in today's lecture has been very enlightening, and I am thankful to Dr. Matheshwaran.
Questions.
Mhm.
Questions.
Questions are. Since there are some online questions, if Dr. Matheshwaran has time, we can present it.
We have few questions there from online chat box. Israel strategy over West Banks by settling civilians and occupying land area. Is China following similar strategy near LAC?
Well, China has the control of what they wanted in. When you say LAC, I presume you're talking about accession. In the rest of the areas, it's border and McMahon line that way. As far as accession is concerned, the area of interest has been in their control for a long time. Okay, so and that's an area not easily populatable because it's at very high altitude. But when you go on to the international border areas in the regions of Northeast and Central India, particularly the Sikkim and Bhutan areas, yes, what you're saying in recent news reports, there is concern because they've started creating some kind of villages across the what we see as the border, and a couple of them, as the reports, is inside us. But the Indian government has not yet confirmed any of that. So these are military created settlements. they can call it as villages, but fundamentally they're all military-oriented ones, because these are regions in which normal settlements are not easy to develop. And if you go through many of these regions, particularly in the northeast, people who move around there are largely people who move across for trade or family connections and grazing kind of a thing. So fully settled ones will generally tend to be a little back further down.
The next is, what will be the consequence if India takes a complete neutral stand? Won't that favor India's national interest?
Already
And
taken a neutral.
So in my opinion, they said, in my opinion, today's strike of Israel against Iran is strategically timed to counter the growing influence of BRICS. Enlighten me on this.
There's no connection to BRICS, because what does Israel got to do with BRICS anyway? See, you must clearly understand, Israel also has, it will not go against India easily, it will not go against China easily, one of the largest trading partners for Israel. It will not go against Russia as well. If you notice, throughout the Ukraine war, Israel has not made any statements against Russia, unlike the West, right? So there's a lot of Russian origin Jews, as I mentioned earlier. But the strike against Iran is, as I see it, as per what the news report that I've seen before coming here, Iran has said there's not very much of damage. This is more out of pride and hurt ego that they have to demonstrate that they are able to counter a strike that has come from Iran to them. And therefore, keeping the American advice and control in mind, they only attack military targets. And the Iranians have also said, yes, few of the military targets have been attacked, the minimal damage or marginal damage. So now it depends what Iran would want to do, because Iran had warned Israel that if you now try and respond, we will destroy your infrastructure, right? So in my mind, this is, the Israelis have kept that in mind as well, because the last strike clearly proved that none of their defenses will work against a massive attack, a saturation attack as Iran had launched. And I think they have the ability to do that as well. So they've also demonstrated, so it's more kind of a saving your face and then hoping like hell that it doesn't escalate any further. I don't think it will escalate this way.
Did Russia make an open statement that they condemn the attack on Hezbollah or Iran? They support the country?
Well, yeah, that's another part of the West particularly, and Mossad and Israel is particularly adept at targeted assassinations. Okay, this they've been doing for many years. I think this needs to be called out, and if Russia is called out, they're absolutely right. Because if you really read what, contrary to the picture painted of Nasrallah, he's actually been a more moderate guy. And the very idea of killing all the top leadership is to assuming that the organization will collapse when such a large number of leaderships get knocked off. I think they also learn their games. They've also learned their lessons. So there is quite a well-distributed leadership pattern that is existing. And that shows in the way Hezbollah is fighting the ground battles against Israeli IDF army. And they sustained a fair amount of casualties. So I think one is their targeted assassinations are not serving their benefit. Second, as a mechanism, targeted assassinations of, particularly when you're into the ceasefire talks and other discussions, assassinating somebody who's a leader, political leader particularly, is not a correct thing. You kill him on the battlefield, that's a different one. But this is a culture, again, we go through history. It's a culture of the West. The CIA and even the US military has been focused on targeted assassination right from the beginning, particularly in the Cold War. So see the history.
One more question.
Yeah.
He's asking, Israel is committing genocide, many children and women have been killed. Why any global organization not able to stop it? What is the purpose of having global organizations? You have US behind you, who's going to come and intervene? So if somebody wants to take Israel off, there are only 2 other countries who can probably do, or 3, if India is friends with Israel, we're not going to do that. For reasons that I've explained, China and Russia, the others who are capable of doing it, they're not going to do that. And then US says,
I am glad the support. I will defend Israel. Nobody is going to come there. That's it.
If you say Arab Palestinian conflict as a non-kinetic warfare, what is non-kinetic warfare?
Non-kinetic,
Non-kinetic, non-icon.
non-kinetic war.
No, non-kinetic warfare is where you're not shooting at each other. Okay, that's a peacetime activity. But what you're doing right now is all, I mean, overboard kinetic warfare.
Okay.
I would request Dr. Ramohan to present the mementos to the speakers today.
I hope all of you are very happy. Should we have more lectures like this? Okay, very nice. So, as a token of our gratitude to the two wonderful personalities who have come here, I invite Dr. Mateshwaran to accept a token memento from us and hoping that he will come here more and more. Okay. Must be vote of thanks.
Okay, so I have the pleasure in proposing this vote of thanks today. My heartiest, heartfelt gratitude to Santanam sir and Mateshwaran sir for this wonderful session. And Santanam sir gave a wonderful start with a very short and very sharp analysis within a short period of time. And Mateshwaran sir gave an extensive thing about the situation in West Asia and how it can impact India. So I hope all the aspirants present here and online will get benefited out of it. You will have more material now to add to your essay writing or whatever it is, related to this topic. So I thank my heartfelt gratitude to Santanam sir and Mateshwaran sir. My sincere thanks to Ramohan sir, who has been our guiding light always. And my thanks to Subramanian sir for being present here. And I thank all of you, all the participants, both offline and online. And I thank all of our staff members who have been instrumental in organizing this and making it successful. And my gratitude I propose my gratitude at the feet of my Guru, Swami Chinmaya for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we'll conclude with a concluding prayer. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you so much. Please give your feedback form, submit your feedback form before you leave this place. Thank you.
Beautiful.
And we will be conducting this kind of lectures every month. So we'll be sending communication to you all. So please come and attend and get benefited. Right? Thank you. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
The pleasure. Interesting. Yeah. Both of them are
Yes, sir, we came. Very good presentation. You have covered all the techniques. You completed the devil.
always enough coverage taken in your masters.
We go deep into all those,
But even the some amount of religious and organizational background, not organizational, that's for philosophy. The animism, Judaism.
If you are more than United States, not in NATO. Only two countries supported India. Either opposite abstain or voted against Israel. Only two countries which voted for India. One was Israel. That's surprisingly, he was.